Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the JMO Podcast. I'm your host, Tayler Michels, and on this episode, we've got longtime Minnesota fishing guide, Brad Hawthorne. Now, Brad's experience and career is really synonymous with Lake Mille Lacs and the surrounding area, and Brad's one of the best educators in the industry. We're super lucky to have him on this week's podcast. Whether you live in the Mille Lacs area or you don't plan on fishing Mille Lacs anytime soon, no matter where you're at in walleye and or smallmouth bass country, the methods and lessons learned by guys like Brad on Lake Mille Lacs really transcend that lake. And if you apply some of those methods and lessons learned from guys like Brad, they can really help you take your fishing game to the next level on your home body of water. Very lucky to have Brad on this week's podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. I know you're a super busy guy, but I wanted to nail you down for just a little bit while you're not on the water, which is rare, and hear a little bit about you. To start it off, kind of take me through the progression of your career a little bit, kind of when you started in the industry and how that's evolved to where you are today.
So way back when I was 19, I bought a bait shop, and everyone was trying to go to, they wanted to go to Mille Lacs, and the fall trolling deal was a huge, huge deal back then. And I built up a small clientele and, from customers coming in, and my family history has always been on Mille Lacs. My great-grandma Lucy was actually the one-room schoolhouse teacher in Garrison for her whole life. So we've been up here a long, long, long time. And basically, long and the short of the bait shop is, bought the bait shop, and it turned out that Gander Mountain had just built one of their largest stores ever just south of me, about 5 miles. So it didn't last that long. But the positive note that came out of that was the guide business. I slowly built that clientele from the time I was 19. And when I was about 26, I was able to go full-time guide. And in the off season, because the rates weren't what they were, today, in the off season, I'd pick up odd work, and it just kind of morphed into what it is now. And with people recognizing, like, hey, this guy he's a consistent producer of fish, TV shows were calling me. And they would say, hey, can you put us on fish? And I'd say, yeah, my guide rate is this, but if you use me on the TV show, it's free, because it's a mutual scratching each other's back. And that's really when things started to take off, was through TV. And next thing you know, we added another boat to the service, and now we're one of the largest guide services in the state of Minnesota, and with like a 70% return clientele, which is absolutely amazing when you consider the busy lives of our customers. Like that many people are coming back to Mille Lacs every year.
If you were to go back, you tell your 19-year-old self that you were going to be someday where you're at today, and that was really not that long ago. You've got a lot of career ahead of you yet. What's your perspective on that? Did you ever think you would even kind of end up where you are now yet, with so much yet ahead of you?
I had no idea. To be honest, 100% honesty and transparency, and I had no idea when I was in my 20s what the fishing industry really was. I knew from a young age that I loved to fish, and more so, what I really loved to do was to help people catch fish and to teach them how to catch fish. And that's what if I had to guess, that's what excelled it. Because a lot of guys go, oh, you guide every day, you fish a lot. And case in point, today, I threw out about 8-9 casts today just to figure out color for my clients. And once we got color dialed, I didn't cast another line all day. And customers see that when they go out with other guides, and the guide's in the front of the boat casting ahead of them, vacuuming up all the fish. And being a guide is about your customer. It's about putting smiles on, kids' faces, families' faces, getting, older people, younger people from all walks of life out there and having a good time. And it's one of those things where that's why you hear of guides that I think they make it, and other guys just kind of get washed away, because it's not about you fishing. It's about you teaching people the the fastest and most productive ways to extract fish out of every situation. And unfortunately, to do that, you have to make a lot of mistakes and learn from them. And that's basically the product of a really good fishing guide, is going, it's not about you catching the fish, it's about your customers catching the fish. And the fish don't bite every day. And 3 or 4 trips a year where we only get a half dozen fish or a dozen fish, well, you have to leave that customer with no doubt in their mind that you tried and did your best. Instead of trying 110% on a normal day, on those days the fishing's tough, you have to try 200%.
And you talk a lot, from that guiding perspective. Like, just there's so many people outside of your 70% return clients. They might see you as their fishing guide, quote unquote, but your content goes far beyond your guiding business. There's so many people that probably aren't even don't really understand the extent of your guide career, because they just like to consume your information and your teaching information. And you've really become really quite an ambassador far beyond your guide business. I mean, is that something that you think about and embrace?
It is, and it's really humbling. I never thought, guys like yourself would call and actually really care what I had to say, because I was more concerned about putting people on fish and earning an income for my family. And what came from it was, these guys were like, man, this guy's got a 15-year history of full-time guiding, and let's ask him. Let's talk to him. Let's go do a show with him. Let's get him on a podcast. Let's get him on the radio. Let's see what he has to say. And I'm still really humbled that people were like, hey, Brad, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm flattered on this side. And, for that exact thing, your perspective on, I wanted to ask you, you spend a lot of your time guiding on Mille Lacs. Talk to me a little bit about Mille Lacs, because the Midwest fishing community, there's been a lot of discourse, some negative, some positive. It's sort of Mille Lacs Lake is kind of a funny lake in itself, in its reputation, but it's been consistent with the upper echelon of fishermen and guides that go there. It's always been a positive. That fishery is as good of a walleye fishery as you could ever want it to be, but you still have some naysayers that maybe just decide that for political reasons and weird, just that weird negative energy, that they're not going to go there. From somebody that's on the water, what's going on over at Mille Lacs? Are people showing up to fish because the fishing is good? And how good is the fishing? And is there still some empty spots at the boat ramp that more people should get on board?
You couldn't find an open spot. If you got to any public access since opener on Mille Lacs, you would be hard-pressed to find a place for your truck and trailer at any public access on Mille Lacs since opener. And the reason for that is I'm rewinding a little bit in history. So I went to Upper Red Lake and guided for 2 years during the winter, because they had shut down Mille Lacs. And I literally went into my first winter not my first winter, but went into that winter with a full book of business, feeling really good about it, really positive, really upbeat, like, hey, we're going to kill it again this year. And just to have the fishery shut down and literally lose all my business overnight, at least about 80% of it. And I needed to do something, and that was go to Upper Red Lake. So those 2 winter seasons, I earned my living up on Upper Red Lake, living in a 36-foot airstream in the middle of winter, which was as close to hell as humanly could get. I mean, it was it was terrible. But so we had that dose of that, 7-8 years ago, where people were shocked by they closed the fishery down. And that summer I came back, and we were catching 30 to 50 fish a day. And then the next year it was closed down, and we're still getting 30 to 50 fish a day. And I still don't know what the correlation between the guides and the launches and the DNR were that they weren't seeing the fish in their net. And now going to the meetings and sitting there and listening to, we were in an influx of change on Mille Lacs where we had historically been surveying the lake for walleyes for 30 or 40 years with the same traditional methods, with nylon nets and nylon trap nets, which are highly, highly visible. And then you take a lake that went from 8 foot, I could be 8, could be 10 foot. I'm not sure. I don't remember that far back on water clarity, but it was somewhere in that realm, and literally doubled through the invent of, or the influx of invasive species like zebra mussels that cleared our water up. And when the zebra mussels get into a lake, they go through a population cycle where they just peak, because that species doesn't know where the ceiling is on how many of them can survive in a body of water. So they peak, and then when there gets to be too many of them, they die out to what that body of water can sustain. So they're actually a really, really smart, clam, if you will. But that is my theory, and it's just my theory, in my opinion, is that we were using old sampling techniques for a body of water that wasn't the Mille Lacs that you know and that I know, that had literally, in a 5-year period of time, went from having the same water clarity it's always had, the same amount of fish it's always had, to the DNR not being able to sample these fish, because I firmly believe that these fish can now see these nets. They weren't as susceptible to being caught in these gill nets that they once were before. And if you take a look at the Native Americans with their gill nets, what would happen there is we're using nylon nets, which are highly visible. You can imagine what they look like. You've been to a seafood restaurant, you've seen them hanging in the ceiling. To the natives, for their take of the quota, they're using nylon nets, and in some cases fluorocarbon nets, which they can't see. So what the DNR then began doing is using some monofilament nets to do their testing. And then we had the 2013 year class, which was a bolstering year class, which they said is going to carry us through. But still today, right now, our average catch just today, and this is like, I love talking to you about this because we're able to get the fresh data in the moment. Today, we caught 52 walleyes. Not one of them was over 23 inches. The majority of our catch today, I'd love to tell you we caught, trophy fish all day, but that's not the truth. The truth is our biggest fish today was 24.5 inches. Yesterday, our biggest fish was 27.5 inches. But today, our average fish size was 17 inches. That's not the 2013 year class. That's more like the 2015, 2016 year class, which didn't really show as high as the 2013 year classes, but that made up the bulk of our catch. So I think Mille Lacs has gotten so clear that the DNR needed to use other sampling techniques to actually figure out, how many fish are in the lake. And now we're actually getting to a spot where you've seen where the quota's gone up and up and up and up every year for the last 6 or 7 years. And that is due to one thing, and that's more fish showing up in whatever survey they're doing, whether it's a gill net or a trap net. There's more fish showing up in those, and that's it. So the part that bothers me about when people think Mille Lacs doesn't have any fish in it is if you think about Mille Lacs and you think about when they closed it down. They closed it down, and again, these are numbers off the top of my head, but when they closed Mille Lacs down, there was still 1 million pounds of walleye in the lake. That is a lot.
That's a lot. That's a big number.
It's a huge number. And that was only counting fish, I believe, over 13 or 14 inches. They only classify them when they can spawn. So you take that and you go, well, why was the fishery closed down? And it kind of raises some suspicions, and, the conspiracy theorists will say one thing and some people say another. But the bottom line is Mille Lacs has always had a ton of fish in it. The only lake that outproduces Mille Lacs in natural spawning is Upper Red Lake. And if you think of that, you go, holy cow. But we're living in a day and age now where Mille Lacs is a co-managed resource, where the state anglers get a certain portion of the take. The Native Americans get a certain percentage of the take. And together we have to work together on how to allot the fishing times. It's not about keeping fish on Mille Lacs. Now we have something called hooking mortality, which, love it or hate it, it counts against the state angler's quota. So if we're only allowed 100,000 pounds, and in July they decide that, well, due to hooking mortality, we kill 40 to 60,000 pounds, well, that only leaves us with another, let's say 40 to 60,000 pounds of hooking mortality for the rest of the month, plus the winter take season, where we usually are allowed to take one fish per day per state angler. So that whole formula comes together, if you're following me, to where, like this year, they stated we are going to shut Mille Lacs down to walleye fishing. You're not allowed to fish walleyes in June on Mille Lacs this year. And you're also not allowed to use live bait. But that doesn't mean that there's not 2 million pounds of walleye still swimming around in that lake. What it means is Mille Lacs is the Twin Cities playground. And we get so many angling hours up here and so many fish get caught that it affects that ratio with the bans. And when we get up there, we have to hit the red button and stop.
The JMO Podcast is sponsored by Long Haul Trucking. Long Haul's always looking for more skilled professional CDL drivers to join their team. They're a people-first company, and it shows. Their employee-owned, asset-based fleet of over 350 Conestogas is among industry leaders in pay and benefits geared towards long-term success and growth for company drivers and owner-operators. If you're a professional driver or a company that wants to ship product with the best in the business, get a hold of Long Haul at 1-800-255-5153 or find them online at longhaultrucking.com. Long Haul, running on the power of promises kept. Yeah, and I think you touched on it right there. When the seasons get shut down, or something major happens to regulate Mille Lacs in terms of the hooking mortality or keeping fish, it just kind of gets confusing for people. But man, for a guy like you that's out there fishing every day, there's nothing confusing about it when you're putting your clients on 50 plus fish a day. I mean, it's just the story's being told. We just gotta be able to open our ears and listen to it, honestly, I think. And talking all about that, it's really a testament, your passion and commitment to this. I mean, you've got a lot of forethought on it, and it might seem natural to you that anybody in your position would learn these things and know these things, but I just think that's an impressive thing talking to you, that and that's, I think, why people listen to you when you talk. There's no doubt about it. I guess one thing I kind of wanted to segue into, talking about Mille Lacs and talking about, the fishery and everything that it's been through. If you put all the pieces together, and now we kind of flip it from out of the water talk to getting into what that means for the fishing, there's just a lot of fish in there, and there's a lot of fish to be caught, and there's a lot of people in the industry that are big fans of fishing Mille Lacs. It's a world-class destination. It's a destination fishery, whether you can keep fish or not. If you can fish for those walleyes, if you can get there, you just got to do it if you've never been. And a lot of people that go there, their next trip is booked before they leave. And industry people, I hear it all the time. People that are trying to develop confidence in a nuance or learn something new, whatever it is, and just develop as a fisherman. Mille Lacs is one of those places that you can go because you can build your confidence. There's a lot of fish to be caught. That doesn't mean they bite every day all the time. And if you're trying to force feed them something to learn more about it, you might not catch those numbers. As a guy that's out there guiding every day, is it just the diversity that Mille Lacs offers, the size, that draws people in to fish it? What's the most fun thing about fishing Mille Lacs? And for a guy, on the long form question of that, for a guy like you that fishes there all the time, if everybody's going to Mille Lacs to develop confidence and learn nuances on fishing walleyes, where do you go? I mean, if you're on Mille Lacs every day, do you go somewhere else to sharpen your skills? Or is Mille Lacs a diverse enough fishery for you that you can keep changing all the time?
Well, what we see, I used to fish tournaments because I thought I had something to prove, and what I saw in those tournaments was the Mille Lacs anglers, wherever they went, usually dominated. And it was a quick learning session to look at the guys that were placing And the guys that would go to Lake of the Woods and go, hey, we're going to rig chubs. Well, you talk to anyone up at Lake of the Woods, they're like, we don't rig minnows up there. Well, when the Mille Lacs guy goes up there, flicks on his hummingbird, and he's like, hey, these are rigging fish. These aren't jig fish. These aren't spinner fish. So I'm going to rig them, and he does, and he wins a tournament. That's because that angler was versed in rigging. That's because, so if you're a Mille Lacs guide or Mille Lacs angler, and you've been down here a lot, you're a good lead core troller. You're a good long line troller. You know how to run planer boards. You know how to run dipsies. You know how to rig. You know how to jig. You know how to pitch. And you know how to drag. And all of those techniques are, and this isn't knocking on any other lake, but a lot of other lakes are just jig lakes, or they're jig and spinner lakes. And the guys don't sharpen their pencils or sharpen their skills on any other techniques because that's all they have to do to catch fish. But in a tournament situation, you go, okay, well, there's a lot of guys doing different things. And if a guy's pretty much versed, if you take, look at your golf clubs and you got 15, 18 golf clubs in there and you know how to use every one of those and you're a pro golfer, growing up on Mille Lacs and learning to guide on Mille Lacs sharpens your whole toolbox up. There's not a dull tool in your toolbox. And that's what I believe makes Mille Lacs anglers the great. I mean, you look at Kevin McCoy. He learned how to fish on Mille Lacs. He's one of the top tournament anglers, but Mark Courts for that matter. I mean, these guys are all top of their game, and they all learned on Mille Lacs. They didn't go to any other areas and really have to learn anything because they were taught it at such a young age down here. So that's what I think separates Mille Lacs from a lot of other bodies of water. The other part about guys coming up here is when you talk about nuances of, guys learning how to do stuff, they can rinse and going, playing off what I just said is if a guy wants to learn how to pitch jigs and he's never done it, he can go do that on Winnie. He can go do that on Leech. He can go do that on Lake of the Woods and be highly successful. But before he goes all the way up there, he can cut his teeth an hour and a half away from home. And if a guy wants to learn how to do spinners, we can do that down here too. If a guy wants to learn lead core, if a guy wants to learn downriggers, we can do all that here because everything works. And I think that's the draw for a lot of anglers. And then you throw world-class smallmouth fishing into it, and you've really got a win-win for the customer that could really care less about keeping fish. And I'm going to be 100% honest, man. 7-8 years ago when they closed Walleye, it was like kind of a bummer, and yeah, we lost some business. But then me and several other guys were out there going, yeah, this is what we're catching. And we do videos, and we'd prove it through social media, like this is what we're doing. And it took a while, and people were like, well, if I can catch that many fish, I don't care if I get to keep any. And that's what I think makes Mille Lacs great. Outside of our, seemingly all the time shutdowns because they shut us down because we're catching too many fish. And that's the God's honest truth is when Mille Lacs gets shut down, it's not because we took the fish out of there, because we didn't do that by taking one fish a person all winter long. We did that by so many people catching so many fish.
Yeah, when you talk about hooking mortality and racking up those numbers, like the writing is on the wall. I mean, there's a lot of fish to be caught.
And that's the frustrating part for me when I talk to a new customer and he's like, well, you can't keep any fish. I heard that lake's fished out. And I go, no, that's not the case. And then you do a short educating session on, hey, this is a typical day, and you explain it to them, and they're like, really? Because it's almost the consumer, the non-guide, the Mille Lacs aficionado is not up on. They think closure means, why else do you close? Why do you close a road? Because it's bad. Why do you close a store? Something bad happened. I mean, that's what people are programmed to think. But when you look at what the truth is the fish are biting too good to close the fishery down to remain inside our contract.
It's almost like we need to figure out a new terminology for it. Like if there was a word that meant, closure or whatever, but it had like a positive connotation, it would make that whole discussion probably 1,000 times easier to the layperson at a sports show.
Exactly. And we're getting there, and we're getting there one guide trip at a time, one launch boat trip at a time, where guys will go on a launch trip. Well, some of those launch boats will house, 15 to 40 people. You get 40 people on a launch boat, and you chalk up 200-300 fish, and at the end, you got 40 people standing around going, "I thought this lake got fished out last year."
Yeah.
And the launch captain puts his head in his hands and just shakes it.
Yeah, that's a good indicator of what the perception is out there. But yeah, you just got to hope that, for the right reasons and under the right context, those people are able to go back home and educate their friends at work and whatnot, and just let them know, like, hey, there's something funny going on up at Mille Lacs, because they say it's closed, but yet we're still catching all kinds of fish. But you also kind of mentioned there, Mille Lacs is not just a one species destination, right? Anybody within a million miles knows that there's trophy muskie, there's trophy smallmouth since forever, and you can catch a bunch of nice walleyes out there. But one thing, anytime in the last probably couple of years that I've heard your name come up in a conversation behind the scenes or whatever, more than one time it's come up about you and this topwater smallmouth bite. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to say that I went and researched it, but I've heard it more than one time. And so I'm going to just try to shoot a couple at you and see what you can teach me. It sounds like you do some smallmouth guiding, probably quite a bit on Mille Lacs. There's a topwater bite. People's heads are exploding from it. So my question, I guess, is, what can you tell me about it? Now, I don't want you to cannibalize your business. If somebody needs to know the ins and outs, they need to just go to Mille Lacs and book a trip with you. But there's a lot of great smallmouth water all around the Midwest. That is obviously undeniable. I'm out here in the Dakotas. I mean, we've got smallmouth just down the road from us here. What can you tell me about this topwater smallmouth thing? And what are some of the things that you're looking for that maybe I could try on my body of water and see if I could recreate it?
Okay, so topwater fishing is, I'm not going to sell anything out, but when I explain it, it's a really simple thing, and guys will figure it out. So it's topwater fishing. If you take lure categories for topwater, there's not too many of them. You got your popping lures, you've got your prop lures, and then you've got your walking lures, or you've got your sub-walking lures. There's like 4 or 5 categories of topwater lures, and they all work out here at different times. And we usually see the topwater bite start by the bug hatches. And that is, for walleyes, the bug hatches turn them on like Christmas morning. I mean, it's a feeding frenzy. They digest them very, very quickly. So if they're full, 4 hours later, they're eating again. And it's just a buffet, a never-ending buffet until those hatches stop. And on Mille Lacs, when the bugs start to go and you get the right wind, it'll push those bugs in. And when they just start is when that topwater bite really starts to pump up. And we've had 30, 40 fish days on topwater, which is amazing. And the customers, I think the reason you're hearing about it is because we've done a couple hundred trips, 200-300 trips on Mille Lacs topwater. And word starts carrying to where I get customers that are like, "Hey, I want to book a topwater trip with you." And I'm like, "Well, I don't offer topwater trips, because I can't time the bug hatches." And I know everyone wants that because it's such an adrenaline rush when that, when fish hits the jig, you get a thump and you set the hook and you reel it in. But when you have a visual and you're watching that topwater come in and you see a fish erupt on it and you have to pause and then set the hook, it's emotional. And you see it when a guy misses a fish, you see it when he gets it, and it's an all around, it's just an exhilarating experience. It brings that, people just get amped about it. It charges them up. It gets that adrenaline going. It's an adrenaline rush before you actually have the fish in your hands looking at it. And I think that's why you hear a lot about it. But in a nutshell, the topwater bite on Mille Lacs starts around the bug hatches, and typically in the early mornings and evenings surrounding those bug hatches is going to be your best topwater time period.
Yeah, and getting a little deeper into that nuance, you were talking about your lure selection being limited, but around a bug hatch, it's not that easy to match the hatch probably and get bit. I mean, what's your progression in terms of a day of fishing when you wake up and you know what the forecast is before you wake up and you get up and the lake looks perfect and you're going to go out there and you're thinking, this is for sure going to be one of those days, one of those few days this year that we're going to get them. What are your absolute go-tos in the tackle box? What's going to be on your first cast, and what are the conditions going to be like?
Well, I like the skitter pop. Skitter pop is a nice little subtle bloop, 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 got the feather tail on it. It's super, I know it's an older lure, but it's such a producer. The other one's going to be the skitter prop, which you can make that thing gurgle, belch. You can make it do whatever you want. Plus, it's got a prop on the back of it. It's just super, super awesome. And then those are kind of my go-tos, but I kind of adjust it to the fish, right? So let's say you're using a large 4 to 5, 6 inch topwater, and you're seeing fish hit the surface, but they're not committing to that bait. Well, then you just downsize to a 4 to 5 inch and see where that commitment zone is. And sometimes, even though you have fish hitting, feeding on the surface, they just won't hit a topwater. And that tells you, you got to throw something else, and that's, you can go from seeing fish hit on the surface to throwing bucktails because they look more like a buck, So that's kind of where we started. I get up in the morning, I look at the lake. If I see fish feeding on the surface while I'm waiting for my customers to get there, or if I stop at our first spot and I don't see any fish feeding on the surface, I'll go, okay, it's not quite starting yet. But if you see fish feeding on the surface, it's not just one. You literally see the whole school of fish that is focused on the surface of the water, and they're eating off of it. They're not making big splashes. Smallmouth actually pop the surface when they're eating bugs a lot like a trout or a sunfish would. That's what you're looking for.
I love it, Brad. What else you want to add? What do you got? What do you got coming up here? What are you forecasting for some of the stuff you got coming up?
So July they're shut down to walleye fishing and no live bait, which means we're just going to do smallmouth trips, the month of July. So it is what it is. And judging from the traffic I'm seeing on Mille Lacs, I mean, during this COVID stuff, people are getting out fishing, and I'm proud of them. I'm happy to see the access is plump full. I'm happy to see people getting out as a family, enjoying Mille Lacs. And you look at it and you go, it's a really, really good thing. And just because our accesses are so full, I'm thinking they probably, initially they thought they might open it up in July due to no traffic. But what has happened is people, we hit record license sales in Minnesota this year, because people wanted to fish. It was one of the only things they could do with their family to get out and spend time on the water and have those memories with their family. And we're seeing people from all walks of life at the access. We're seeing guys coming out in 16-foot boats, fishing around the accesses. We're seeing families in pontoons, family in runabouts, just getting out and enjoying the water. So I just from that added fishing pressure, I do believe they're going to shut us down to walleye fishing in July still. But in other news, if a guy wants to come to Mille Lacs and cash in on basically a world-class smallmouth fishery, world-class muskie fishery, world-class pike fishery, you can still come to Mille Lacs and do it, man.
I love it, man. Where can people find you? What are your social medias, and how do people find your content?
So if you go on Facebook, my page there is Hawthorne's Guide Service. You guys can look up that. It'll have all my info on there. And for the web guys, just go to MilleLacsLakeGuide.com, and my website will be right in front of you, and you can contact me through there. Or if you're old-fashioned like me and just want to give me a call, my number is 651-271-8600.
That's perfect, Brad. Thank you so much for the time, man. I'll let you back at it.
Hey, man, thanks for the chat. I appreciate you.
And thank you, everybody, for following along on another episode of the JMO Podcast. Head over to Facebook or Instagram at Jason Mitchell Outdoors, where you can recommend a guest or a topic for an upcoming show. If you're listening on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, or Apple Podcasts, make sure to subscribe and share with all your friends.